Powerful earthquakes can have the most unexpected consequences. And I'm not even talking about tsunamis. Everyone already knows about those. Just recently, satellite images captured stunning changes to the coastline of the Noto Peninsula in Japan. These changes happened after a 7.6 magnitude earthquake on January 1st, 2024. To everyone's surprise, the coastline extended by 820 feet as the seafloor simply rose out of the water, giving people new beaches. In some places, the ground rose by up to 13 feet and shifted laterally by more than 3 feet. However you look at it, this is a disaster, but in Japan, there's an extra layer to it. So what about the missing island? Yeah, in Japan, a whole little island called Isanbi Hanakita Kojima actually went missing, and the Coast Guard planned a full-on search operation to figure out where it went. An uninhabited islet, basically a small rock outcrop, was discovered about 1,600 feet from the village of Sarufutsu in the north of Hokkaido. This happened quite a while ago. Local fishermen were aware of the islet's existence at least as far back as the 1970s, and in 1987, scientists studied it. But then it simply vanished. Maybe the islet was gradually eroded by wind and rain? Here's how the coast looked before it vanished, with an island visible far away. And here's the latest footage. No additional land visible on the horizon. It's funny that no one noticed the disappearance of an entire island at first. It took a full 2 months after it vanished for people to realize that something was missing. And it was a writer named Hiroshi Shimizu who noticed it. He visited the area to start working on a new project, a sequel to his picture book about Japan's hidden islands, but unexpectedly, the island was no longer in its usual place. Hiroshi reported it to the local fishing cooperative. The fishermen sent out boats to search for the island, and they found only a small rocky shoal was left of it. The island never came back. Meanwhile, while some parts of Japan's land are disappearing, others are unexpectedly emerging. In late October 2023, an underwater volcano awakened near the Ogasawara archipelago in the western Pacific Ocean. By November, the eruptions had become so strong and frequent that they led to the emergence of a new landmass, 330 feet in diameter off the southern coast of Iwodo Island. Yeah, the volcano just spat out a whole new island, and it's now considered the newest one in the world. Of the ones we know about, of course. So far, experts don't know whether the island will keep its current size, expand with the volcano's eruption, or simply disappear into the sea due to natural erosion processes. Any of these scenarios is equally real. You can even see the island from space. It's 330 feet wide and up to 66 feet high. As for what's really going on with it, there's disagreement. Some people say the island's getting smaller because the waves are washing it away. Others that it keeps going up and getting bigger. But either way, the island's already been named Nijima, which translates from Japanese as New Island. Makes sense? Actually, the situation isn't all that unique. Underwater volcanoes regularly rise new land masses off the coast of Japan. Sometimes these new islands get eroded and disappear under the waves. And sometimes they merge with other islands that were here much earlier. Something similar happened, for example, in 2021 when a new island appeared thanks to the eruption of the underwater volcano Fukutoku Okanoba, which is really good at making islands. Many new islands confirmed in 1904, 1914, and 1986 disappeared pretty quickly. The most recent one lasted only about 2 months due to waves and currents. However, some islands created by volcanoes turned out to be more permanent. In 2013, a volcanic island grew so large that it merged with a nearby landmass and gave the world Snoopy Island. And even though it no longer looks like the cartoon character, this island, now known as Nishinoshima, still exists and continues to grow. Actually, if you browse through scientific sites, you'll definitely come across articles about new islands forming in Japan. This happens all the time. Some islands appear, others disappear. Volcanoes erupt. Volcanoes are always responsible for creating islands. The molten magma, which forms as a result of volcanic activity, hits the ocean and explodes, creating chunks of rock. They can be up to 3 feet long or even longer, and sometimes they're thrown up as high as 165 feet. But then as the debris piles up and rises above sea level, they form another island. This is how it looks underwater. Volcanic ash and stones pile up on the shallow seafloor until it's too much. The height and size of an island that emerges from a volcano completely depend on the duration of the eruption. The longer the volcano spits out magma and ash, the bigger the new piece of land becomes. The fact that all this happens in Japan is no accident. The islands arise above a chain of underwater volcanoes forming what's called the Ring of Fire, a horseshoe about 25,000 miles long, stretching from the southern part of South America, running along the coast of North America, crossing the Bering Strait, then passing by Japan and descending to New Zealand. The Pacific Ring of Fire includes between 750 and 915 active or dormant volcanoes, which makes up about 2/3 of the total number of volcanoes in the world. Sometimes different numbers are mentioned, but this depends on which regions are included in the ring, so variations are possible. By the way, according to the Japan Meteorological Agency, out of about 1,500 active volcanoes in the world, 111 are in Japan. It's no surprise that islands are constantly being formed here with so much volcanic activity. Unfortunately, along with volcanic eruptions, the Ring of Fire also brings about earthquakes. About 90% of the world's earthquakes, including most of the biggest ones, happen within its bounds. Both eruptions and earthquakes happen because of the movement of Earth's tectonic plates. Japan is located at the point where 4 tectonic plates meet and has as many as 5 junctions, making it the most seismically active country on Earth. About 10% of active volcanoes are here. In short, this is the perfect place for new islands to emerge. Japan is a real natural laboratory where new landmasses are constantly growing. However, it would be wrong to say that this happens only in Japan. In 2013, an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.7 struck southwestern Pakistan, and immediately afterward in the Arabian Sea, a mud hill appeared about half a mile off the coast, and it was impressive. About 260 feet long and up to 65 feet high above sea level. The hill, essentially an island, was formed by a mud volcano, a jet of mud, sand, and water that reached the surface after tectonic plates shifted. When describing how the island appeared, the media even used the word risen and compared it to Atlantis. Well, no traces of an ancient civilization were found there, but it turned out that beneath the muddy surface of the island, there's a gas that ignites when set on fire. So actually, it's located under the seabed. It's just huge deposits, and the movement of tectonic plates caused it to rise through the cracks in the mud. Islands like these pop up in the Arabian Sea quite often, and then they disappear when either the pressure that created them drops or the silt just gets washed away by the waves. A similar island, for example, appeared during an earthquake in 1945 but disappeared about a year later. Also, islands appeared in 1999 and 2011, but due to reasons unrelated to earthquakes. However, that's a completely different story. What I'm more curious about is this. If a new chunk of land can just pop up from the ocean, is it really possible for life to emerge on it? In fact, it is, if you look at geological history. For example, the Hawaiian Islands were literally created by numerous volcanoes. They represent a trace of volcanic eruptions from the Hawaiian hotspot. Due to underground activity, the Hawaiian Ridge emerged, an underwater mountain chain with many volcanoes. 4 of these volcanoes are active, 2 are dormant, more than 123 are extinct. Most of them now survive as atolls or underwater mountains. But we're interested in the islands. Initially, right after they appear, they're completely barren. There's no one living there and nothing growing at all. Have you ever seen how an eruption happens? When it stops, the molten lava gradually cools down and turns black and dry. It's at this stage that the wonders begin. Because Hawaii is right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, far from the rest of the world, but life still managed to find its way here. Scientists think that mosses, lichens, and early seeds were either brought to Hawaii by the wind or by ocean currents, getting caught on floating debris. Other seeds probably got stuck in the feathers of migrating seabirds. This is how vegetation appeared on the islands. After the black, lifeless landscape becomes more or less green, birds arrive. It's easiest for them to get to a new area. Only then can animals appear. Sometimes it happens by chance, like with the monkeys that drifted to South America from Africa on natural rafts. And sometimes people bring animals. We're actually really good at that. And it's Hawaii, about 1,800 miles from the nearest continent. For life to appear on some new Japanese island, it should take much less time, and the chances of that are way higher. By the way, the Japanese archipelago wasn't formed by volcanoes. Once these islands were actually part of the Eurasian continent. But about 15 million years ago, the plates shifted, pulling what would become Japan to the east. That's how the Sea of Japan was formed, and the archipelago itself. However, there are volcanic islands too, and a whole group of them. but they're far out in the ocean. And that little island that appeared in October is also part of this group. No one lives on the already formed islands, but there is vegetation, animals, and a military base. Even before that, Micronesians would come here, according to the artifacts discovered. But why do some volcanic islands disappear in a couple of months, while others last long enough to make it into history? Well, a lot depends on what the island is made of. If it's lava, it might last longer. But if the island is made of a lighter and loosely bound rock, the waves will just wash it away into the ocean. So new islands made of ash and debris barely withstand constant contact with the ocean, but when a volcano erupts continuously, it can lead to the formation of lava flows, and they eventually create a firmer and sturdier surface. And if the island really becomes fixed on the surface, it turns into... By the way, who owns it in this case? I looked it up and found out that there are actually rules for claiming new islands. Countries can claim everything within 12 miles of their coastline, and archipelagic countries can claim everything between their existing islands. Even if the island is farther, within 200 miles from the coast, countries can still claim their rights to it according to maritime law. But if a new piece of land appears anywhere beyond these boundaries, everyone starts hunting for it. It's like a race, or just pure madness. A good example of how this works is Antarctica. Sure, it's not quite the same as a tiny island that a submarine volcano spat out, but the system is fairly similar. In the last century, all the countries hurried to be the first to put up their flags and establish outposts to demonstrate that they could control the area. And it's not enough to just plant a flag on a patch of unclaimed land, you also need to prove your right to it. For that, there's the Sirius Sled Patrol, an elite unit of the Danish Navy whose members patrol the northern and northeastern parts of Greenland on sled dogs every year. Basically, just to show the world that they're still able to exert physical control over their territory, even though it's just an uninhabited tundra and endless ice. Imagine doing the same thing on tiny islands in the middle of the ocean. And I don't think that's an easy task either. 7,000 new islands. Japan recently updated its count of islands and discovered 7,000 more than before. No one realized they were there. It's not that big a deal, 7,000 islands more or less. Nevertheless, digital mapping showed that there are 14,125 islands in Japan, which is more than twice the figure of 6,852 islands officially used since the 1987 Japan Coast Guard report. This, of course, doesn't mean that 7,000 islands suddenly appeared over the years. It just means that technology has advanced enough to spot even the smallest pieces of land. Interestingly, the new number hasn't changed the total land area owned by Japan. A good place for science. As I already said, when islands appear, they are barren. But scientists are always hopeful that in the future, they'll become green and habitable. So every new island is an exciting prospect for researchers who get a rare chance to study life on the island from the moment it appears. They can observe everything in real time rather than learning about it after the fact. Because of this, new islands are occasionally visited by groups of scientists who record everything they can, keep an eye on changes, and so on, but they take every precaution. It's vital that the scientists don't introduce any extra organic material, such as seeds. Otherwise, the experiment won't be as accurate and the conditions won't remain perfect. People create islands. When a country is located on islands with limited land and mountains, there's not always enough space for construction. Waiting for a volcano to make you a new island is not really an option. It might take too long, and the island could quickly fall apart. Because of this, people have to create artificial islands. They become new land for building. In Japan, for instance, an airport has been built on a completely artificial island. Kansai Airport has become the third biggest in Japan, with tens of millions of passengers using it each year. It even made it into the top 10 in the world. To create such an island and then put an airport on it, they had to spend around $20 billion. But it turned out to be very sturdy. Neither earthquakes nor typhoons have been able to harm this airport so far. It sank after all. According to recent observations by the Japan Coast Guard, a new island that formed from an eruption off the coast of Iwo Jima has almost completely sunk underwater and is barely visible. Most of Nijima, which appeared from the November eruption, has disappeared into the sea with only a tiny bit remaining. The reason's simple. Volcanic activity calmed down, erosion continued, and by mid-December, the island that formed in November had reduced to roughly half its size. Erosion continued even after the new year, and observations in February showed that the island had shrunk to 82 feet. It was originally 330 feet. In the end, the sea won.